Welcome to all who joined just now, and thank you all to you for being with us so far. At core of automotive cybersecurity, we need to be aware of latest incidents, vulnerabilities, and the emerging cybersecurity threats, and the trends that directly derive from software-defined vehicle transformation. Next session is all about that. With no delay, let me introduce to you our speaker, Giuseppe Serio. He has more than 2 decades of experience in automotive industry. He's been responsible for global and strategic initiatives at Upstream, serving as a VP Market Development. He has been a thought leader, featured speaker, and the panelist on automotive security topics around the world, and one of the first proponents of the idea of Vehicle Security Operations Center for connected and autonomous vehicles. Please welcome Giuseppe Serio, and thank you so much for joining. And stage to you, Giuseppe, please. And
Yeah,
just sorry for interrupting. Just guys, please feel free to visit the booths as well, and post your Q&A in section. Thank you. Please continue. Sorry.
yeah, Jitendra, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Again, warm welcome also from my side. As you mentioned, the topic today is related to the first half of year report by Upstream. So we have the working title SDVs and Beyond. I'm the market development vice president, and I will go through the findings of the first half year report. Before I do that, we know that the report that has been issued since 2019 is greatly appreciated in the industry. This is our third mid-year edition. We started in 2019 to issue our first one. We will continue to issue these type of reports. For us, it's a way to communicate to the industry, share our thoughts on findings, and also help drive resilience in the industry. So with that, and no further ado, let's dive into the three major topics that we have gathered and we want to share today with you. So one is the rise in backend server attacks that we have seen. The second is elaborating on the importance of having dynamic SBOM as part of the analysis in terms of the risks and the intelligence associated with that. And last but not least, we'll talk about agriculture and why this is an interesting finding in the experience there with ransomware attacks, what it teaches to the automotive industry as a whole. Okay, so when we look at the SDV, and this is the first chapter of the half-year report, when we look at the defined vehicle, is that it has a few perks, a few features, a few capabilities which are really important, and it will drive business in an important way. So you see some data here. It's expected by 2030 to account for $150 billion. This is a dramatic increase, an opportunity for the entire industry, and it offers improved digital experience. It introduces new features in a much faster way. Ideally, it can reduce or to a certain extent even avoid very costly recalls by using over-the-air updates. And last but not least, and again, this is to underscore the importance to the bottom line, it is a means to deliver new revenue streams for the industry. Now, to look more specific and give you examples, this is not just something that is reflected in a niche domain or in a niche discussion. So you see here logos of two very large OEMs who, in one case, GM, in the annual earnings call in Q1, they estimate that the software service revenue by 2030 will account for 20 to 25 billion. And also the example of Stellantis, where this number is also expected to have a very significant contribution into the bottom line of this OEM. Now, what does it mean? It shows that the revolution that has started with connectivity and the connected vehicle is really happening. And this is not only a technical shift, it's also a mindset shift, meaning we are moving a step away from selling just hardware or engineering components into selling more and more software, or if you will, selling services. Very much like subscription that we know and use every day. So the Spotify of this world, or the Netflix, just to give you example. Now, it means that in future this can unlock even more additional revenue streams to the OEMs, and therefore it's really a strong promise that we are embarking as an industry. Let's look at the data. Now, it's fair to say we are here in a group, we care about cybersecurity. Data is a fundamental ingredient into data. And if we look from a perspective of the data that is generated, let's say a connected vehicle with less features, so not the most sophisticated one, can generate up to 0.4 terabytes of data per hour. Now, let's do a little bit of an exercise and look at a standard vehicle or a little bit more sophisticated vehicle with 200 onboard sensors. And let's assume that about 50 to 70% of that data is uploaded to the cloud. This means that there's around 1.4, or in extreme case, even up to 19 terabytes of data per hour. And more importantly, if we look at an average of minutes that a car is driven, and I'm taking here an example from the US, so around 17,600 minutes that on average a single car is been driven. If we take that data, then we are almost between 380 and 5,100 terabyte. Now, why am I saying this? Now, the software-defined vehicle does not only mean that software is going into the vehicle. It means that the ability to communicate and the requirements that arise from having this ability is impacting a lot also on the data that is transmitted between the vehicle and the backend service. And to make it to the point, I'm using here a photo from a conference that happened in March in Munich. It was the IT symposium. And you see here Oliver Zipse, the chairman of the board. And he had some remarkable comments about cybersecurity, which we feel we wanted to share with the community. So one, he said, protecting the integrity of the vehicle and the customer data comes before any business. Second, as an OEM, the responsibility for cybersecurity, and I would add in this case also for the data, is along the entire life cycle. And last but not least, the manufacturer is the master of the interfaces into the vehicle. Now, this is remarkable from looking where the industry started a decade or so ago, where it was really not a thing to talk about automotive cybersecurity, or it was very, very in the infancy with the initial connected vehicle. Now we have gone a long way, yet, and you see this in the graph, the reported incidents, and these are the publicly reported incidents, obviously, they continue to to have a steep curve that continued to rise despite all the education, new regulation, best practices that is on the way. And if you look at the particular number, so just in 2022, the incidents accounted for roughly 270. And I have this type of discussion many times. So it's compared to, if you compare that number to IT, it may sound a little bit of a low number. However, taking 270 as a number is not equal to 270 vehicles. What it really means, the exposure here, is to millions and millions of vehicles. And this is how we should treat. So the magnitude, the scale of how an impact, an incident can reflect on an entire industry is very much at the core of this analysis. And to make it even more crisp, 97% of all the attacks are remote. And we knew it the moment we connect to the internet. That's where most of the attacks will happen. And the sophistication and the impact of those attacks are increasingly. And we know software-defined vehicle plus the ecosystem that surrounds it creates new complexity, and it makes it even harder to secure. That's why the curve is poised to even increase over time, uh, and we'll need to handle that accordingly. Okay, so again, the steep rise in backend server attack is what is really at stake. And to look more specifically on the impact on the data side with the cyber attacks, if you take the data from our report in 2023, which is looking at the data of last 13 years, effectively data breaches accounted for 30%. Now, in the H1 report, so in the first half alone, if we look at the data there, it's 37% already. Again, what does it mean? Software-defined vehicle, more software into the car, but lots and lots of more data flowing between the car and the backend system. So software and the product and the ecosystem that is around it is really what is driving this number up. And the backend system are at the core of the SDV, and they drive also concern related to cybersecurity. They are the interactive part, if you will, of the software-defined vehicle. And well, in the future, the insights that we had from getting data from the connected vehicle was related to services data or repair data, etc. Now, today, the type of data that is leveraged here, it is reflected on the entire management and can be done remotely. So again, either it's a patch or a feature update, or sometimes even maintenance, monitoring. All of that is driving the data in the context of the software-defined vehicle. Now, let me share a little bit of a storyline here with regards to the software-defined vehicle and the ecosystem. Remember the slide that I showed about Oliver Zipse, where he claims that it's the responsibility of the OEM to manage and handle the entire security and data along the life cycle. We have seen in 2022 a remarkable rise, not only in the quantity and sophistication of attack, but we are in a new game. This is really what the data is telling us. Why? If we take the two pivotal points to our mind in the industry. So one being the moment of the famous 2015 attack, and compare it to what is possible today with API type of attack or more related to infrastructure attack, it's fair to say that in 2015, and we call this Automotive Cyber Threats 1.0, it took a very long time for researchers who dedicated the entire focus on exploiting one single vulnerability on a perceived low-hanging fruit type of architecture. So one specific model and make, and it was focused on some safety critical embedded in-vehicle network that the majority of the focus of these researchers were geared towards. If we look at 2022 and the attacks over there, what this is really telling us is that today you really don't need to have physical proximity to a car. You don't need years of research. In fact, sometimes it's a matter of weeks. The impact is not just limited to one single vehicle, and it can even affect millions of vehicles. And the domain expertise is really no longer needed. In fact, sometimes in order, and there has been research shown, it's even enough to have just a VIN number. So this is telling us that we are in a new game. We have entered a new era where we need to look at cyber from a holistic perspective, meaning not only on the product side, but also include blind spots. And one of the blind spots that we believe is fundamental in order to get both sides of the coin is related to the backend APIs. In fact, it's sometimes really hard to define what is the legitimacy. So if I translate blind spot with legitimacy, it's really the state and the impact that can happen to a vehicle or a driver that's really difficult for existing architectures to be able to spot on. Now, if you look at the chart again, API can generate from the backend, but the specific vehicle context and correlation is something that's really, really hard to see. And there are examples like I pair my vehicle. So this is something that happened actually in reality. If I pair my mobile device with a vehicle, that's a legitimate use case. If I do that for tens or hundreds of vehicles, then at least at minimum, it should be suspicious. But with the current notion and the current point visibility, it's really hard to detect this blind spot because in terms of the legitimacy of these type of events, it's something that is exposed, and we don't have the full perspective of vehicle plus backend side. Now, we believe that in context of mobility, it's important to take an IoT-driven approach, and the vehicle, as we know and we understand, is probably the most complex IoT device. And the responsibility, and again, I'm referring to the BMW CEO, it's really the responsibility to understand by an OEM if the legitimacy and the context, and also the potential impact of the data flow it is really overseen in the right way. Okay, let's move on to the second part. And the second part is related to the role of dynamic SBOM. So if we look at today's BSOCs frameworks, now ideally, the VSOC is there to answer three fundamental questions. One is, how should VSOC be able to anticipate threats? The second is, how should the VSOC detect those threats, and how should it be able to respond to those threats? In order to do that, it needs empowerment. Empowerment with the governance framework, and it's really core and key to look beyond compliance. I'm sure many of you in the audience agree that compliance is one thing, risk management or mitigation is another thing. I'm borrowing the word here, security theater, from a friend in the industry, from Darren. And essentially, if we focus on the first part, the compliance, it's fair to do it. It's the initial implementation. It's important to have this in place, but in order to really be able to address risk mitigation, risk management, we need to go beyond that. We need to look at the processes and playbooks that need to improve over time. We need to look at the empowerment of a VSOC across the organization. Keep in mind, for IT SOC, it's IT people who talk to IT people. And for a VSOC, it's actually involving the entire organization. So it's really important to have this cross-organization visibility, and ultimately remediation. We need to automate. Again, I mentioned how much data is flowing back and forth in the mobility ecosystem. So it's really important to have the ability to scale up and automate. And what is the proposal now when we talk in terms of dynamic SBOM? So at some point, it's really important to look at the TARA because it's fundamental for instance in the R155 or 156. That's something that auditors care a lot. It's the basis for doing the risk analysis. Looking at how it's treated today, it's a very static approach. And that's why the term dynamic SBOM is very relevant. Many times it's not supported by tools. It's a process which may need to be updated because of the SDV updating over the air, new features, new capabilities, and thereby eventually introducing new risk profiles. And therefore, looking at the ability to dynamically update, adjust, and change the SBOM is something that is really important. And when we look at the challenges with that in our traditional model, no matter if it's related to the ISO 21434 with its clauses, at the end, we have a phase where we look at specific verification or validation, and then there is a post-production and operations activities that need to take place. And we believe that it's moving in the right direction with the SDV, but we need to move in a more agile way towards DevSecOps. It's something that is really tearing down walls, not physical walls, obviously, but the walls that exist between different organizations. And what we see today is that while if you take this V model and put it here as an endless loop, so this agility aspect of verification and validation, yet the post-production and operations, or the CSMS part or the VSOC part, no matter how we want to call it, is still today in a sort of isolation. Now, what we have been advocating is that obviously, in order to do risk mitigation, and also prevention. In the IT world, in IT security, we are very much familiar with compensating controls. Now, risk mitigation is something that is fundamental. It's the baseline. It's hardening the product. It's putting security controls into the vehicle to make it really hard for attackers to even start with. Um, on the other hand, it's really hard, and sometimes because of business rules, and I refer back to what I said with the legitimacy of API information, sometimes it's really hard to distinguish and define the right use cases. Sometimes it's even on purpose that the communication needs to happen, and therefore compensating risk mitigation capabilities, like looking at the threat and looking at analysis of eventually new methods of attack, or the very monitoring of a vehicle, is something that is really at the core, or should be at the core of an analysis, to come to a point where it is a double eight. And as I mentioned before, it is a continuous cybersecurity way to orchestrate in the context of the software-defined vehicle, from the requirements phase up to the operation, and integrating thereby people, process, and technology in a way that, and here the proposal is to look at the Terra as a natural collector or connector, connecting point between the verification or validation loop and the requirements that are posed to operation for the connected and autonomous vehicle, including incident management, threat and vulnerability management, to have a way to more dynamically inform and have this continuous improvement loop being part of the real world side as well. Now, this is ending part two, moving over to part three, and looking specifically at ransomware attacks in agriculture and construction. We picked one example, so it's just for the sake of illustration. Now, agriculture is an interesting area. Why? Because if you look at agriculture or even construction machines, in a certain way, the degree and automation that is happening there is a segue, or is a sneak preview into what will happen in the passenger car or in the fleet business. So these vehicles don't operate in on roads, on their own fields, and here the disruption to the fleet. And one of the other example we can quote, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with, is in the geopolitical times that we're in Europe, switching off tractors in Russia by Ukraine, and therefore having a disruption. Imagine that would happen around the world. Here we're talking really about the food supply. Or imagine there's delivery before Christmas that is not happening, just to have a few examples. So the degree of automation that is today more advanced in the agriculture and construction vehicle space is something that we need to be aware of, and it's something that we need to really look in terms of the exposure and the microeconomic conditions that are affecting these type of capabilities in our industry. Now, what does it mean in terms of SDV? This is so far maybe the downside of it, but there's also a positive story that we can tell. With the risks that are associated with the software-defined vehicle, there is a tremendous opportunity. Let me finish, therefore, and this is actually, I'm almost at the last slide, with a positive note. So all the challenges that we have presented so far in the report are something that the industry is keen to tackle, and we see a lot of effort in the industry to actually master it. And over-the-air updates, the ability to have software patches is something that you see in this example. And it's no longer required to wait for years to have new features implemented in a vehicle. It can happen actually in a matter of days, or maybe in the future a matter of minutes. So the promise of the software-defined vehicle actually is the agility to not only unlock new features and new services and new money, new revenue stream. It's the promise also to have the ability to remediate, become more resilient to the challenges that they pose and that they are introducing. Yeah. Now, as an example, platforms like ServiceNow or others, they are then pervasive and provide organizational visibility. And the VSOC, if empowered the right way and being at the core of the organizational departments that communicate and collaborate with the VSOC to remediate all those issues, is the vision that we espouse and we believe is the way forward. So we need to be very quick. We need to learn how to master it, how not only to renew features and functionality, but also be able to remediate as quickly as possible amidst the challenges that we live in our industry. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention. Here's a QR code. If you have not downloaded and read the copy, I invite you to read the report and let us know what you think. It's always welcome to share your thoughts, and we're eager to respond to questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Giuseppe. I believe we have off stage a couple of questions. Uh, Maybe we can have it, and the remaining we can take it off stage. So one question was the two questions basically. One was the given the global nature of automotive industry, how are international regulatory bodies working together to establish consistent cybersecurity standards for vehicles sold in different regions? So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would say if you take the UNSCE regulations, so R155, 156 on one side, on the other side, the ISO 21434, I think this is the de facto standard that is applied. We know there's more to come, like NIST 2, or even in Europe, the Cyber Resilience Act. There will be more and more requirements in terms of cybersecurity and standards. What we advocate for, and I believe we should not focus too much on the regulatory uh, ecosystem. What we advocate for is to be able to be agile enough that no matter what the risks, the standards, or regulations are that would come up, there's an ability to be agile enough to master them, because otherwise it becomes always a response. It becomes a reaction to something that is affecting an organization. And we believe it's important to be agile enough to actually be able to master as quickly and integrate as part of the organization in order to move fast forward.
Thank you so much, Giuseppe. We have one more question just popped up. If digitalization is the main gateway for the attackers so far, don't you agree that adoption of SDV would open more avenues for them to exploit?
Absolutely. So the attack vectors increase not only on the product side, so more software in the vehicle means more data that is transferred to backend system, but the software-defined vehicles means actually that we have much more attack vectors. Think of electrification, so the charging station become a new one. All the third-party applications that interact and sometimes telematics services which are communicating with the mobility ecosystem that the vehicles operate in. They are all introducing new attack vectors, new risks, new vulnerabilities, and it's really important to have a way to understand what is exactly at risk. And that's why you've seen it in the report, we had this double eight. It's so vital to have the VSOC as the let me say the traffic control, if you will, the center of all related operations, but also security information, working hand in hand with the entire organization, not only for remediation, but think also of reputation, damage to the brand if something is not addressed in a right way. And therefore, the importance of treating this holistically in a comprehensive way is really fundamental.
Thank you so much. And I believe we can take one more. I have received another question like, how can organizations effectively balance the benefits of data access in software defined vehicles with the security concerns related to the sensitive vehicle data and controls?
Oh, that would take a webinar of its own. let me let me try to give you my brief answer to that. So I believe that as I mentioned, it's important to automate. It's important to have a way to understand the exposure and the risk, and in order to master the software defined vehicle challenges, it's imperative that as an organization we are ahead of things. We have the ability to understand what is in the data, but more importantly, we as an industry need to share more insights on cyber. So SRG is one very good example where people come together to educate themselves, learn about what is the latest, and therefore we try to make it as hard as possible for the bad guys to do the things they do.
Thank you so much. I think like this entire session was very informative and too much of information, like hard to digest as of now. But soon, with the time, we will be able to do it. And I believe we have a bit of time left, and I would request audience and attendees to go to our lounge areas, join the booth, visit the booth, talk to the speakers available after sessions, and get all your queries answered. And here, I would really would like to thank you so much again, Giuseppe. I really appreciate that, and thank you so much for your time. And have a good day. Yeah. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Likewise.